Hey guys, Alexander here, and what I'm going to do is talk about either changes or additions I'd like to see in a possible Dragon Ball Raging Blast 2. I am aware that this game may not come out, but knowing those greedy companies like Spike, Namco Bandai, and all of them who make Dragon Ball Z games, a sequel to Raging Blast is bound to happen. Now, I have it categorized off into 5 sections: presentation, design, story, depth, and controls. These 5 sections aren't necessarily the different parts of the game, but more like the 5 things I look for to be good in any game. Also, and this one's pretty important, I'm not talking about anything that's unrealistic or anything that we know isn't going to happen. I'd love for the random Fox from Dragon Ball Episode 83 to be a playable character, but that's not going to happen. By the way, there really was a Fox guy in Dragon Ball Episode 83, haha. So basically, all of my ideas are things that are quite possible and not too far stretched.
What's up now?
Let's get started with presentation. The first thing that I like to see in Raging Blast 2 is weather effects. I don't care if it's just like where you have to choose a certain weather condition on a stage before the battle, or if it just randomly occurs during the battle, but come on folks, rain, snow, thunder, and lightning. Think of having a battle in a stage that's pouring rain with lightning. It would be awesome and escalate the epicness of the fight even more. The second thing that I'd like is a pretty obvious one: a better camera. Regardless if you defend Raging Blast camera, let's admit, it can be improved. It gave a lot of bad angles, especially if you just fallen down from an attack and your opponent was charging their energy right above you, or a scenario similar to that. While it seems like all negative reviewers say that the worst thing was the camera, I don't think it was as bad as they say, but I'll admit it did ruin some moments in Raging Blast for me, so having a better camera would be great. The next few things in this category are pretty simple. First of all, I think in a sequel the body outlines and the character models need to be thicker. You know, the cell shading and all that. It wasn't something that bothered me in Raging Blast, but hey, if they're making a sequel, they might as well make it better. Next, I also believe that in the story mode, the subtitles need to be easier to read. The subtitles are small, don't blend in with the background well at some points, and are just annoying. Of course, I think improving the effects they use in creating the beams, blasts, and explosions and all that is just plain out obvious, but it's still worth mentioning. Last but not least, I also think they should change the overall style and feel of the game to be more like the show. When I say show, I'm mainly referring to the Japanese version, by the way, but the dub can fit here too. Like, for example, the menus feel very high-tech and modern, and it even reminded me of Dragon Ball GT. They might have been original, the menus and all, but it didn't really feel like Dragon Ball. The next category is design. What came to my mind first here was a better tournament mode. Tournaments are cool and all, but playing them offline is boring, especially when you have to unlock minor stuff through them. Tenkaichi 3 did attempt to make the tournaments more unique with the time schedule, but that didn't really improve things at all. Now, I'll be honest here, I'm not really sure how they'd improve the tournament mode, but there's gotta be some way. The next thing I have is another obvious one: more gameplay techniques. Raging Blast did introduce about 8 new gameplay techniques, but the problem was half of them were very gimmicky and they felt forced into the gameplay. For instance, Super Rising, signature skills, the sky change effect, and wall crashes were all gimmicky and forced. There's definitely room to add a few more offensive and defensive capabilities too. Moving on, this is one idea that I highly doubt is going to happen, but still, if you think about it, it would be awesome. Character-exclusive rushes that aren't super attacks. They could be just like the super attack rushes, except they wouldn't be automatic and you'd be in full control of how you'd perform each step, and of course they'd also be weaker. Not only would this add a whole new layer of depth to the gameplay, it would also diversify the characters even more, which is always good. You can also think of this as implementing more complex rush combos or special pursuit attacks. The only problem here is that this idea is very easy to screw up by Spike, but if they can do it right, it'll rock. Another small idea I have is to somehow make the super attacks less spammable. I mean, let's face it, everyone, myself included, loves to use tons of super attacks and ultimate attacks in every battle more than any other type of move, but that does kind of create a bit of an imbalance in the fighting engine. I'm not saying do any major change though, but yeah, whatever. Aw, this one is just so obvious. More characters! Now, I'm not saying put every character from BT3 back in and add even more. I'm just saying add a few good, solid fighters that we're missing and we need. Ultimate Gohan and Deborah are the easy ones to figure out from Dragon Ball Z. But there's also movie characters such as Tourless, Cooler, and Android 13 to put back in. And don't forget Dragon Ball 2, folks. Some of the additions of BT3 from Dragon Ball may have been too weak, but there are still several strong ones such as Kid Goku, King Piccolo, Master Roshi, Tambourine, etc. to put back in, along with new ones such as Young Krillin, Young Yamcha, and Young Tien. As for GT, well, I know the characters are really strong and good to play as in a fighting game, but I can't stand GT, so I could really care less if those characters are in Raging Blast 2 or not. Along with the characters, I'd love to see more stages. What we have in Raging Blast are just the really basic ones. Dragon Ball Z has a plethora of diverse battling locations, and the video games just aren't taking advantage of it, unfortunately. Speaking of stages, keep on making them more destructible. The problem is Raging Blast ads claim that you could do like 5 new things that you couldn't in BT3, and in the end you could only do like a couple, like sinking the ground with a pursuit attack or doing a wall crash on your opponent. Now, I'll admit, there isn't too much more you can do with the stages before it becomes chaotic, but there are still a few things like putting holes, cracks, and ditches in it. The last thing in the design category that I'm really hoping for in a Raging Blast 2 is the option of playing it where all the characters are completely balanced, or true to the show based on power levels and all. The reason I say that is because, come on, this has been a problem plaguing Dragon Ball Z fighting games, and recently with online play, it's getting worse. The characters are heavily unbalanced, as in you have to really be a pro at this game to beat Super Saiyan 3 Vegeta with Chaozu. And it is true that they've made it true to the show with how powerful characters are, and that's a good thing for a Dragon Ball Z game, but it's not a good thing for a fighting game, especially with online mode. They all love using the same super strong character, and even though my favorite Dragon Ball characters are Yamcha and Tien, I don't have a chance using them online, which I hate. So here's my solution. First of all, balance out all of the characters for at least online mode. Unless you're using custom characters, all the characters should have the same amount of health and land about the same amount of damage with their supers and ultimates. This will promote fair playing and competition even more, and I think it will make the online mode better. As for offline mode, well, I don't care as much, but I'd say at least in like versus mode have the option of using the balanced character system or the true to the show system where characters are stronger than others. That way, if you have a friend over, you can either have a perfectly balanced multiplayer match, or if you want to reenact the DBZ story yourself in the versus mode, you can have the characters true to the show. The other modes really depend, but I'm not too worried about them. And that's all I have to say on design. I mean, I know I didn't mention any of the other modes besides tournament, and that's because, well, I think Raging Blast did good enough with them, and where I do have ideas for improvement, they're unrealistic. Okay, I swear, that was a long category, but don't worry, the rest are short. Story. This is really one tricky category. Well, let's just start off with the obvious things first. Either get rid of the collecting stars system altogether and just use D points, or if you're going to keep the star system, let us know what the star missions are before we play the battle the first time. I think the reasoning for this one is really obvious. The star system was tedious and annoying, so yeah. As for the actual storytelling, well, shit. I for one have to be honest in that I'm sick and tired of playing the same old Saiyan, Frieza, Android, and Boo sagas over and over again in each game. You can only do it so much before it wears thin. So if they are going to give the story to the same sagas, well, I don't know how to handle it because people love BT2 story mode for covering every battle in depth, and people love BT3 story mode for breezing through the story quickly and leaving out all of the boring stuff, so that I can't really give my thoughts on. What I would like, though, is a completely new what-if storyline made just for the game. It's not impossible because it's been done before semi-successfully with anime games like Naruto Clash of Ninja Revolution 2 and One Piece Unlimited Adventure. There are several problems with this, though. First of all, it is usually a really weak plot and feels like you're playing through filler. Second of all, it would have to be incredibly cheesy to include enough characters that you'd have to fight against, which means you could have a lot of random characters just appearing in the plot for no real reason except to provide the opportunity for you to fight that character. Still, regardless of all that, it would at least be a breath of fresh air from Fight Raditz, then Nappa, then Vegeta, and so on. Death. Well, I'm going to make this one short because a lot of this category overlaps with design. Like I mentioned, if they want to have death, have those character-exclusive non-super attack rushes. That's probably the biggie. There's also a few other things. First of all, add back the automatic defensive moves from BT3. I know they were kind of gimmicky too, and I'm talking about Z-counters, sonic sways, and all that, but at least they were advanced and fun to pull off. I still did like the idea of having the manual defending with the swaying, countering, and vanishing, so they should keep that too, just add the automatic ones on top of that. Second of all, add back the automatic offensive moves that BT3 had, but Raging Blast didn't. What happened to the more complex pursuit attack strategies, the dragon smashes, the offensive vanishing attack after the perfect smash, and all that? Those were really fun to pull off because they were complicated, effective, and pleasing to watch, so I'd love to see them back in. To sum things up, the best way to increase the depth in Raging Blast 2 is just to have more options in the fighting engine. I did like the idea of the cancels and the melee combos because it made it harder to string together rush attack spams, and I also did like the concept of signature skills even though there's much to improve with those, so yeah. Controls. This one is another short category. First of all, there were some minor problems with the controls with some unresponsive attacks like Super Rising and all, so the simplest improvement comes in the form of making sure they all work perfectly. This wasn't a big problem in Raging Blast, but still mention-worthy. Then I guess just make sure all the buttons aren't just tacked on quickly, and they actually are the most comfortable for the gameplay. To be honest, for the most part, I think Raging Blast did a good job mapping the controls. If they can find a way or two to improve them, that's great, but a bigger suggestion is to actually not change them around completely again like they did with Raging Blast, because that's just annoying. And that's it for this video. I'd love to hear your ideas for Raging Blast 2, so please rate, comment, and subscribe.